He thought it was just another ordinary day, a walk to clear his head, a moment of peace by the water. But in this neighborhood, peace wasn't his to claim. The color of his skin turned routine into suspicion, and suspicion into something far more dangerous. Before he knew it, what should have been harmless became a battle for dignity, safety, and truth. What unfolded next wasn't just personal, it pulled back the curtain on a system too many pretend doesn't exist. And the flood that followed changed everything. Marcus had always found comfort near the lake. It was his escape from the noise of the city, a place where he could breathe, think, and just exist without judgment. On most evenings, he'd jog along the same winding trail, headphones in, nodding to familiar neighbors who passed with quick smiles. Life wasn't perfect, but in those quiet moments, it felt steady. He worked hard, kept to himself, and cared deeply for his family. To anyone else, he was just another man trying to carve out a little peace in a busy world. But in this neighborhood, his presence was never just ordinary. Whispers followed him. Glances lingered a little too long. He noticed, but brushed them off after all. What harm could a jog or a walk by the water cause? What Marcus didn't know was that beneath the surface of this seemingly calm community, resentment had been building. To some, his simple routines were seen not as harmless, but as a threat. It wasn't about what he did, it was about who he was. And one evening, when he returned to the lake expecting the same quiet he'd always found, he would discover just how dangerous that perception could become. That evening, the air was unusually still. Marcus adjusted his hoodie as he walked the familiar trail, the sound of gravel crunching beneath his shoes. It should have been peaceful, but something felt different off. A group of neighbors stood near the edge of the lake, voices low, their eyes fixed on him as he passed. He gave a polite nod, but their silence spoke louder than any words. Minutes later, he noticed something strange. The small wooden bridge he always crossed, the shortcut he had used for years, was gone. Only jagged planks remained, torn apart as if ripped out in anger. A fresh sign had been hammered into the ground. Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. His heart sank. This wasn't an accident. Someone wanted him out at first. He told himself it was a misunderstanding. But the whispers he'd ignored suddenly grew sharper in his memory neighbors, talking about keeping the area safe, glances that felt more like warnings than greetings. He realized now they hadn't just destroyed the bridge. They were destroying his right to belong. When he turned back toward the path, two men stepped into his way. Arms folded, stances firm, eyes cold. "This isn't your place," one muttered, just loud enough for Marcus to hear. It wasn't a conversation, it was a message. Marcus's pulse quickened. He took a slow step back, forcing a steady breath, not wanting to give them what they wanted, fear. But inside, anger burned. The bridge wasn't just wood and nails. It was freedom. It was routine. It was his dot over the next few days. The hostility deepened. A letter slipped into his mailbox. "Stay away from the lake." Last warning. He could feel the community closing in around him, drawing invisible boundaries he was never meant to cross. Each time he walked by, the stares lingered longer, heavier, until even the air seemed weighted with accusation. He tried to reason with himself, maybe he should let it go, avoid the confrontation, keep his head down. But then he remembered his father's words. If you let them erase you quietly, they'll never stop. They'll just move on to the next thing. That thought lit a fire inside him. He wasn't just fighting for a bridge. He was fighting for the right to exist without permission. One night, standing at the edge of the broken crossing, Marcus looked out at the water glinting under the moonlight. Rage and resolve collided in his chest. If they thought they could push him into silence, they were wrong, because what he was about to do next wouldn't just reclaim his dignity, it would show every single person who doubted him just how much power he truly had. And when the dam's gates began to creak open, the sound wasn't just water rushing free. It was the sound of years of quiet endurance breaking into undeniable defiance. The roar of rushing water filled the night as the dam's gates strained against their hinges. Marcus's hands trembled not from fear, but from the weight of what he was unleashing. For years, they had chipped away at his dignity, dismissed his presence, torn down his bridge, and left him with nothing but warnings to know his place. But now, with every creak of the metal and every surge of water pushing forward, he knew there was no turning back. Then came the shouts. Flashlights cut through the darkness, beams darting like searchlights across the lakefront. Neighbors gathered, their voices panicked, but none louder than the HOA leaders who had mocked him, who had said he didn't belong. Their precious resort gleaming lights, polished decks, expensive boats was about to drown under the very force they thought they controlled. Water burst forward with a violent crash, swallowing the shoreline in seconds. Screams echoed as the manicured perfection of the lakeside community crumbled. The boardwalk splintered. The boats snapped from their docks like toys. What they had built on exclusion and arrogance was now being stripped away in the flood. Marcus stood firm, his chest heaving, watching the destruction unfold. This was not the plan he ever wanted, but it was the only language they understood. For once, the fear was no longer his. It belonged to them. In the chaos, their eyes met his steady, unflinching, theirs wide with disbelief. And in that silence, louder than the crashing waves, the truth rang clear. They could destroy bridges, but they could never destroy him. The water kept rising. The screams grew louder, and Marcus knew nothing about this community would ever be the same again. When the water finally calmed, the lakeside community was unrecognizable. What had once been their pride, the shining resort, the manicured shoreline, the symbol of their control, lay in ruins. But Marcus did not stand there celebrating. He stood in silence, the night air heavy with the sound of dripping water and distant sirens. He hadn't set out to destroy. He had set out to be seen, to be respected, to walk a path without being told he didn't belong. Yet it took a flood and unstoppable force to reveal the truth. The injustice was never about bridges or property. It was about power, about who was allowed to exist freely, and who was forced to prove their right to stand on the same ground. For Marcus, the cost was heavy. He knew he would face questions, blame, maybe even punishment. But something inside him had shifted. The fear that once weighed on every step was gone. He had reclaimed something deeper than a bridge, his dignity. And in that moment, the community was forced to see him, not as a trespasser, but as a man who refused to be erased. This story may feel extreme, even shocking, but the truth is, it echoes in countless quieter moments every single day. People stripped of belonging, people forced to carry the burden of prejudice, people made to fight for the simplest right, to exist without suspicion. So the question is not whether Marcus was right or wrong. The question is, how many more bridges will be torn down? How many more lives disrupted before we finally face the real problem? Because racism doesn't just destroy communities, it destroys humanity. And until we all see that, the flood will never truly end.